Thank you for doing this. I kind of wanted to just have a casual conversation with you about it. Um, so before you had this near-death experience and that really changed the trajectory of your life, what was your background? Because haven't seen a lot about that in reading about you and things like that. Like, how did you grow up and where you're from, that sort of thing.
Well, I was born in 46. Um, my parents took me and my two older sisters to Sunday school. When I was a kid, I believed in Jesus. When I was 12 years old, I asked my parents that I would like to be baptized, and I was. Um, when I got to the age of 15, I was seriously thinking that I was going to become a Christian minister. And I had a conversation with my Harvard Divinity School pastor about what we Christians believed in. And he made it very clear to me that God, Jesus, heaven, hell, angels, etc., those were all myths. Um, they were not true things. They were just stories, and that the point of Christianity was to be a good person. After my 2-hour conversation with him, I was totally disillusioned about Christianity, and I became an atheist. And I was an atheist up until June 1st, 1985, at the age of 38, when I died in a hospital in Paris and had a near-death experience and met Jesus. And he turned my life around.
Okay. And I know you've talked about um, this near-death experience a lot. Was that conversation that you had with the minister, was that the only thing that turned you towards a more materialistic worldview, like an atheistic worldview?
Yeah,
Yeah.
because, I mean, I was 15, but I thought I was, a mature adult, which of course I wasn't. I was still a child, um, looking back now. But he just, he just blew the legs out from underneath me.
And then, so you're in Paris when this happens,
Yeah,
and you have this you had a was it a bowel obstruction? Is that what it was?
no,
No.
a perforation of the duodenum.
Okay. And can you tell me in whatever terms you're comfortable with, can you describe that near death experience? I know you've done it a million times, but you don't have to be lengthy with it, but just kind of tell me and the listeners that I'll have the impact that that had on you.
Well, first of all, this is difficult for people to understand, but any near-death experiencer will tell you the same thing. It's much more real experience than what we call reality. It's much more intense. It's much more intensely real. And there's a lot of things about it that are um, difficult to understand. Like, for example, there's lots more colors there. And I was trying to figure out what all these other colors were and where they came from, but I couldn't understand them. I mean, that's just one of the things about the hyper reality of the near death experience.
Yeah, that kind of more real than real um, sort of sensation, right?
Yep, not just sensation, perception in every way.
Mm.
I mean,
And
what do you know about the world except what comes through your five senses? And there you get a lot more input than you get here.
so you had this near death experience, and you're in a hospital in Paris, you said. Um,
Yeah.
you have this ruptured duodenum, and can you sort of describe what you experienced from the moment that you had the pain?
Um, it was the most intense pain I'd ever had in my life. It dropped me to the floor, kicking and screaming and yelling. Um, it, it was unbelievable. And that continued for 10 hours. Every doctor in the United States that I've talked to told me my life expectancy was maximum of 2 hours. The doctors in France said my life expectancy was 1 hour, and I lived for 10 hours.
Wow. Now, was this 10 hours while you were having the experience, or was this leading up to the near death experience?
Yeah, this was all before the NDE.
Okay. And so my understanding, and I have, heard your story a few times actually. The first time I heard it was on the Maybe God podcast, and you had an experience that researchers call a negative near-death experience, right? Where you had,
At first, yeah,
yeah. Um, can you describe that a little bit?
sure. I was taken from the hospital room. This is after I died. I was taken from the hospital room down a long, dark hallway into increasing darkness. Um, we finally got to a place of like total darkness, and I told them I wasn't going with them any further. And they said, no, you've got further to go. And they started to push and shove, and I fought back, and we had a huge battle. There were lots of them, and one of me. They won. They tore me apart. They bit, they clawed, they kicked, and they did invasive things to me that I don't talk about. And then lying on the floor of that place, just total pain all over. Um, I heard an audible voice say to me, pray to God. And I thought, I don't pray. And the voice said, pray to God. And I thought, I don't know how to pray. And the voice said, pray to God. And I thought, okay, when I was a kid in Sunday school, we learned prayers. And so I said the first verse of the 23rd Psalm and the first verse of the Lord's Prayer. And when I did that, the people around me became extremely angry and were yelling and screaming at me in very, very obscene language, which I won't repeat, but what they were communicating was, there is no God, nobody can hear you, and we're going to do much worse things to you if you don't stop immediately. But along with those threats, I also noticed that they were um, retreating away from me very rapidly. And so I continued to make up feeble prayers, saying them aloud, and eventually I realized that I could not hear or sense their presence anymore. So I laid there. I went over my life, was very um, feeling very negative about my life. I thought I was a big somebody, and when I went over my life, I came to the conclusion that I was a little nobody, and sank deeper into hopelessness and despair. And my mind gave me a vivid memory of being in Sunday school singing Jesus Loves Me. And when I heard that, I wanted the faith that I had as a young person. Um, and so I called out into the darkness, Jesus, please save me. And to my complete astonishment, a little tiny light appeared in the darkness, and very rapidly it came upon me. Unbelievably brilliant white light, but it's not light. I mean, some of these things are hard to talk about. If it had been light, I would have been burned up in a sizzle.
Mm.
I mean, it was that intense, but so that's why I say it's white light, but it's not light as we know it, the kind of light. Anyways, out of it came hands and arms, and he picked me up and held me tightly against him and rubbed my back, and we left that place and went to heaven.
And then how long was it? Well, let me ask you this: how long do you think did it feel that you were in that place before you were in heaven?
Um, I don't know, just a day or two.
Okay, and then you're praying, you find yourself in heaven, and what happened from there when you return to your body?
Wait a minute. You just asked me two questions, or did I misunderstand?
Well, I may not have asked it well. So you are in heaven, and I guess what I'm wondering is what is the next thing that happens before you find yourself back in that hospital room?
Oh, um, after Jesus and I had talked for a very long time, and he'd taken me places and shown me things, I told him that I wanted to be in heaven forever. I never wanted to leave. And he said, no, you've got to go back because you don't have the character to be in heaven. You've got to try and live the things that he and I talked about. And so he and I had a very big argument. And I was arguing that he could not, should not send me back to this world. And he was countering my arguments with um, better reasons of why I needed to come back to this world. And finally, after I had exhausted all of my arguments for staying in heaven, I told him that I would come back. And when I said that, without any transition at all, I was back in the bed, back in the pain. And immediately the nurse who had been in the room earlier, who said they were unable to find a doctor and they would try and do the surgery the next day, she was back in the room and said, um, the doctor has arrived at the hospital and I'm going to have the surgery. And they prepped me. I had the surgery at 10 o'clock that night.
Well, let me ask you one more question before I move on, because it's common for people to say that that communication that happens is through telepathy. Did it was it that way for you, or did it feel like more of an actual conversation?
Well, it was telepathic, but it felt exactly like a normal conversation. I mean, I heard his voice distinctly in my mind, and he knew everything I thought.
Okay, and so you wake up and you're in pain and you're in your back in your hospital room. Um, did you immediately feel that this was the realest of real experiences? Did you try to rationalize it? What was it like for you to cope with that?
No, I knew it was real. Matter of fact, I knew it was the most real thing I'd ever experienced. Um, the thing that I was wrestling with was I knew I was going to have to make changes in my life, and I was trying to think of what do I change, what do I do.
And
I've been sort of working that question for the past 40 years.
What from there led you into um, serving in ministry? Did you feel that that was the change you needed to make, or was there something in between that led you there?
Um, no, Jesus never said anything about going into the ministry or the church or anything. But when I came back, I had a very strong desire to go to church, except I wasn't well. I wasn't walking. I was very sick for several months. So when I got it well enough to just walk a little bit, I went to church. And when I went to church, um, I saw a giant sign. The ceiling of the church was filled with angels, and I knew that. I mean, at that moment, I'm just walking into the church. I knew that this was where I needed to be. So I became very involved with the church, very active in the church. And over a period of 2 years, I finally came to the conclusion that what I really wanted to do with my life was not be a college professor, but I wanted to be a pastor. So ultimately, I quit my job at the university. I was a tenured full professor and a department head making really good money. So I quit that job and I went to seminary for 3.5 years so that I could become an ordained pastor.
And how did your yeah, I want to go back to the seminary, but how did your family respond to the changes that you went through?
They hated it. They were totally negative about it and they didn't want to hear about it.
So when you have this near death experience, which is life changing, and then you go into seminary, one thing that I'm really curious about because I have, uh, I've had a year or so of seminary background, and I wonder if I think for a lot of people, seminary is a place that can cause some disillusionment with their faith. Um, and I'm wondering for you how your near death experience impacted your seminary experience. Did you feel that you knew more sometimes than what you were being told? Did it change the way you approach theology
You
in
know,
any way?
I loved being in seminary. If it weren't expensive and if it weren't for the fact that I needed to make a living, I would have stayed in seminary for the rest of my life because I loved it. I loved discussing theology and arguing it and learning more about it. So, anyways, no, yeah, I've heard the old joke. It's not seminary, it's cemetery. Blah 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 and all that stuff. I don't I don't understand it. When I went to seminary, there were 90 people in my class. Um, 3 years later, there were 60. One third of my class had dropped out, which I understand is pretty normal.
Wow. Well, did it? I'm really curious for a lot of people, and because near death experiences have such there's common traits, and then there's things that are kind of different between
Right? Yeah.
individuals that have those. And I'm wondering for you, did your experience kind of reaffirm the faith you grew up with, or did it alter your theology from that moment that you're back in the bed in the hospital?
It didn't alter my theology at all. All it did was help me articulate it much better than I had before I went to seminary.
Do you think that the experience you had changed your view of God? Like, did it change the way you saw?
No,
No. Okay. What denomination did you serve in for that long period that you were?
Well, I went to a Methodist seminary because that was 72 miles away one way, and it was the closest one um, decent seminary that I could go to. And it was like I said, it was Methodist, and I thought it was excellent. But anyways, I I was United Church of Christ, and all the churches I served were United Church of Christ.
Okay. So after you had this near death experience, um, prior to that, you had become an atheist. Is that accurate?
Yeah,
Okay. So you're more of an atheist, and then you have this near death experience. You um, go to seminary, and you're serving in ministry. What was your, because it seems, obviously, I feel in the last few years, contemplative practices have become much more accepted in a lot of Protestant denominations. I'm wondering for you, because you had this profound experience, um, what was your what were your spiritual disciplines like after that?
hmm. um, when I started pastoring, I became um, kind of fanatical of pastoring, and I was working 60, 70 hours a week as pastor. So my personal spiritual life was, of course, there was some prayer, but I was pretty much exhausting myself every day as a pastor.
Did you ever have discussions with other other people in seminary or other pastors that were, they would talk about, say, heaven and hell, and I mean, I have to imagine that at
Yeah,
some point.
I belong to Bible study groups, sermon preparation groups, and we met weekly and we talked about all that stuff. Yeah.
Do you think, was there anything that you brought to them that was, different based on, I mean, you having personal experience of some of the things that they're talking about in um, a non-experiential but a more intellectual, kind of
No.
perspective? No?
Mm. Well, first of all, I don't bring up my near-death experience um, that often, and not when I was with other pastors. I never brought it up. Um, it's I mean, to put it simply, I feel like I was given this incredible gift, and I don't want to lord that over anyone or say, I know more than you do because I was with Jesus. Nah, 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 nah. I don't want to sound like that.
Yeah.
I just don't bring up the NDE that often.
Were you ever tempted to, research other NDEs? I know some folks get
Oh,
really.
I've talked to dozens, maybe hundreds of people that have had NDEs. I've read NDEs. Yeah, I know a lot about NDEs.
Do you feel like there is consistency, and because there are some people working in ministry, like John Burke, as an example, feels like,
Who's
uh,
a good friend of mine, by the way.
oh yeah, he's a great guy, and we've um, talked to him a couple times as well, and I'm glad you've been able to connect with him, because I bet he has he met with you in person.
We're good friends. Yes.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, I know
I've been to Texas several times. He's come and visited me up here.
he feels really strongly um, that God is speaking to humanity through these NDEs.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, first of all, I guess do you agree with that as generally?
Yeah, because I mean, I'm sure you know this. Christianity in Europe and the USA is dying. You know that, right?
Yeah, generally, I know there's been a pretty decent decline, right, in membership and attendance, and
Yeah. Well, I think NDEs are one way that God is trying to counter that because near-death experiences affirm that there is a God, there is a Jesus Christ, and there is a life after death. What more do you want? You know?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's what is really unique about the time that we're living in is that we can kind of have these stories and they're recorded and we're able to bring people back much more frequently than we would have,
Yeah.
in
And
decades past.
if you ever read the book by Carol Zelinsky, she researches near-death experiences all the way back into medieval times. Um, but I'm sure you know it was the publication in 1975, book by Raymond Moody, Life After Death, that brought near-death experiences kind of out in the open. And they started getting known and publicized, etc.
Hmm. Do you find any when you were doing this research and you I'm sure talked to many many people about the experience you had, um, when you hear a near death experience that is not uh, exactly like yours, because not every person experiences like heaven and hell. People
Right, right.
experience the life review and things like that. Um, do you think there's commonalities that are so overwhelming that we should really be paying attention to them? And if so, like, what do you think those are in the time that you spent looking at these NDEs?
Oh, yeah, but let me approach this from the negative side. There's also people that talk about near-death experiences that I think are complete phonies.
Hmm. Okay.
Um, so when I'm hearing or reading about a near-death experience, um, I'm looking for those commonalities, such as every near-death experience that I know and respect says it's all about love. That's the whole point. Love, 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 love. That's it. You know,
Yeah.
that God loves us more than we can imagine, and our job is to love one another. Um, the There are um, things that I think um, contradict a near-death experience, and when I hear those, I judge that that person is making that stuff up.
Hmm. So let me ask you this, because we had the president of Messiah University, that we've spoken to, and several folks. Hope I'm giving him the correct accolades there, but um, one big question I have when we talk about some of these topics from a faith perspective is, do you think that these experiences, and I'm trying to think of how to word this to where it'll make sense, but do you think the near death experiences inform our theology, or do you think that it's kind of the opposite, in terms of, because now we have so much interest in this, and I think it's becoming a very universal topic because so much research, so much scientific research is confirming um, the experiencer. So do you think that these experiences kind of educate the way we look at faith, or do you not really see that as the case?
Um, I'm not trying to be evasive. The answer to your question is honestly, I don't know. I think that the more archaeologists um, explore the Holy Land, the more that they will conclude that a lot of the things that the Bible um, said were happened or were true, they will find they weren't. Okay, let me give you an example. Jericho. Um, about 30 years ago, a woman archaeologist published a book that the whole story of Jericho was not true. The timeline didn't, I mean, it was just wrong from top to bottom. Today, archaeologists conclude that she was completely wrong and that Jericho does fit the biblical timeline and description. So um, I'm sure you know that science changes its mind all of the time. So um, I don't think science is going to in any way prove um, the biblical truth or the NDE truth. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-science. I can talk for an hour about all the ways science has done a 180-degree turnabout in the last 100 years, and they're going to keep doing it.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult time to be just a pure materialist. I mean, even
Yeah,
if you didn't approach it from a Christian perspective, we really can't. It's just there's more and more evidence that there's more going on there.
yeah,
Um, let me ask you a really. I'm going to ask you a theology question as from the first time I heard your story, and anytime that you hear somebody else's experience, man, people are going to critique it or have you know ideas about it, and they have no idea because they're not the person that was there.
yeah,
Um, and I wonder for you, you had this experience, and then you did grow up in church. You had this experience, and then you went into ministry. Um,
yeah.
did what? How do you perceive um, where you were? Do you think that you were in hell? Do you think it's some type of middle place between heaven and hell? Like how do you?
No, no. I think there's just two places, heaven and hell, and I think I went to hell first, and then I went to heaven.
Okay.
I believe that my experience in hell was a real gift from God.
Do you think if you didn't have this experience, um, you had never gotten sick, had this NDE, do you think you would have ever come back to the faith that had kind of been cultivated
Well,
growing up?
I,
No.
um, that's a legitimate question, and I cannot answer it. I would like to think that I would have come back to faith, but I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, it's just such a
Now, I'll tell you one thing that I do know. Um, I became an atheist at the age of 15. I became a Christian at the age of 38. And in that time, no one ever tried to talk to me about God, faith, Jesus, church, anything. Or to put it simply, no one ever tried to evangelize me in all that time. I often wonder, what if someone had tried to evangelize me? How would I have reacted? I don't know.
yeah, that's an interesting question. Um, but man, it's hard. Your story is one of those that would be impossible. I don't know if the most staunch atheist who's ever lived could have your experience and hold on to their to even being agnostic.
No, no
Um,
way. No way.
it's such a when you see and I'm sure you've researched this as well, but you see the numbers of people that had the NDEs, and the percentage that do not believe in an afterlife, do not believe in God after they've had it, is so minute of that group.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so did your family eventually come around to these life changes?
Uh,
Um,
my son did, not my ex-wife and not my daughter.
okay. Were they atheists as well?
Yeah. Yeah. I
Okay.
raised him as atheist.
Okay. Are they still atheists at this point here in 2025?
Not my son. My daughter, yes, and my ex-wife, yes.
Okay. I think that's an area of these type of conversations that gets overlooked so much is and Raymond Moody talked about it a lot when we talked to him. It's just this complete dramatic change because it changes who you are, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
were changed forever after that.
One of the
And
things that, um, when I'm with other NDEers, one of the things that we talk about is that when a spouse has this near-death experience, um, their marriages frequently end up in divorce.
mm, yeah, and I've heard that too. But why do you think that is?
Well, I, of course, have thought a lot about it, and people don't like change, right?
Right.
People absolutely don't like change. And when I was trying to save my marriage with my wife, uh, we went to a psychologist a couple times, and when my wife left, I stayed with a psychologist, and I said, I don't understand why she says she doesn't love me. I don't understand why she wants a divorce. And the psychologist tried to explain to me that our lives had gone in two different directions, and we're not the same people. When we got married, we're completely different, and she doesn't like or understand or appreciate the way you're going, and you don't like the way she's going. So there's nothing in common anymore.
Yeah.
Made a
Which
lot
is
of sense to me.
yeah, I was going to say it's crazy to hear it that way because it just seems like the typical reasons people get divorced, but obviously, in your case, much more profound. Um, is there anything that you, and I think I know what you're going to say, but is there anything that you hope people will pay attention to in these as near death experience, especially with the studies continue to come more and more, culturally relevant, like at least to us in the West?
Um, I don't think I quite understood the question. Say it again.
Well, let me ask it maybe a little differently. Like, do you think that people will pay more attention as these stories continue to become more part of mainstream culture for us? And it seems like,
Okay. Okay. Um, let, let me address that part. You know, there's people in this world that are looking for answers to big questions of like, is there a God? Why am I here? What am I to do with my life, etc. And there's people that have already found the answers to their questions, and the answers to their questions is to get more wealth, to have power, to get revenge on other people. And that's what their life is about. They're not interested in near-death experiences, and they're not interested in people talking about God and heaven and stuff like that. So they just turn their back on all that stuff. To them, that's just foolishness and utterly irrelevant for what they're after. So I think near-death experiences can have a strong effect on people that are looking for answers to, what's the purpose of life and what's it all about. But I think there's a whole lot of people that have no interest. Like I mean, what if I started to talk to you about how to make a mosaic? Okay. Well, I'm just assuming you'd have no interest whatever. I mean, how long could I go on about making mosaics before you tell me that you had to go over? You know, nice
Right.
talking to you. Goodbye. Right?
Yeah, for me, pretty quickly, probably.
Yeah. I just pulled that out of the air, by the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to take too much of your time this evening. I appreciate you even being willing to talk for a few minutes about this because I think your experience is one of the most interesting and probably important um, that people can read about and hear about. And so, yeah, I mean, the more places that it's out there, the better. Um,
Okay. Tell me a little bit about you. Who am I talking to?
sure, yeah. Um, so, yeah, my name's Justin, and I worked in well, still technically work in healthcare to a degree. Um, and I went to seminary as well. I grew up essentially Southern Baptist, and went to seminary for about a year and a half. Um, left there through some just things. I had one of those experiences with seminary that for me was not the most beneficial.
Yeah.
Um, it was difficult to kind of when you hear questions and one thing I think people don't realize that haven't attended seminary is there is an expectation that you're going to sort of pick certain stances on certain theological topics. Um, and if you're not prepared for that, at least where I was, it's difficult because then you have to start asking questions about
Yeah.
um, you know, where you stand on things and why you stand on those beliefs. Um, so I was working in the emergency room essentially for about 20 years,
Yeah.
and there were several experiences I had in the emergency room where I would be maybe go into a room to see a patient post-operatively or um, and that's specifically the one I'm describing because those experiences where someone would say to me, can I tell you something? I'd say, okay.
Yeah.
Um, when I was in surgery, I floated above my body. I saw the hospital, from above, from the sky, essentially,
Yeah.
and they would start talking about some of the experiences that they had, the things that they saw, and to me, from my perspective, was just okay, I think there's maybe they were hallucinating, maybe there's some mental illness here.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, the biggest sort of driving factor in wanting to learn more about this was Bruce Grayson. I knew of Raymond Moody and I knew of his work, but I guess I didn't take it as seriously as I do now.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember I actually had one of Bruce Grayson's book after, and I was listening to the book and driving, just had the audio version of the book. And he started talking about some of the research in the idea of filter theory, that maybe your brain, the organic part of your brain, is not the source of consciousness. And the evidence that he laid out was profound enough to kind of get me to stop, pull over, and I remember I called a friend and kind of discussed that with them, and it started this kind of journey for me, which I would say not nearly to the degree of your friend John Burke, but definitely having a lot of these conversations and trying to pull from them, what is um, pertinent, helpful,
Yeah.
most reliable, um, and it does. I think in a lot of ways, it's informed my faith, and I give John Burke specifically a lot of credit for the way he answers those questions.
Yeah.
because he's not really afraid to try and give you detailed reasons for why he thinks, one experience or one story may validate what he believes. Um, yeah, and I think it's hard to find people like that. A lot of these conversations that you have are going to be, right, this is my personal experience, this is what happened, this is how it impacted me. Um, but I really appreciate people that look at it with a helicopter view, the way that he does, and try
Yeah.
to, really hash out what it means. Um, and especially his story about how he actually got into looking at those NDEs is fascinating to me. So, yeah, I've probably been doing this now for at least a year and a half.
Uh-huh.
Um, had some, really interesting conversations, I think, as a part of this. And I guess not everybody knows this, but my wife worked in television production for a good while, and just worked on documentary projects and things like that. And so, starting this particular project of doing, the podcast, for example, was not a hard thing to step into. Um, it's been challenging for me in some ways, but I definitely think really, really, really encouraging and helpful to hear people's stories and be able to share them even with a few thousand people, whoever
Yeah.
it is, just kind of getting people interested in hearing some of this, because I think it would be for me, it's so beneficial for people to understand that decisions, actions, even your intents have consequences. And I
Right.
think we have such a culture that doesn't really think that's the case. Um, you just kind of do what you want to do in that moment and move on. And really, with all NDEs, we're kind of learning that that is not the case at all. Um, so, yeah, I think that's a good summary of what got me um,
Yeah.
interested in this topic and kind of where I'm at now.